Welcome to Uncomfortable Growth Uncut, where we celebrate those who defy fear, embrace growth, and live without regret. In a world that celebrates perfection, we rarely hear about the challenges, fears, and crossroads that successful leaders grapple with across work and life. Uncomfortable Growth Uncut shines a light on their personal story and the critical human skills we all need today to turn trials into triumph. In this episode of Uncomfortable Growth Uncut, we sit down with the remarkable Tracy Hall, former CMO of Afterpay, keynote speaker, and recent author. Tracy shares her harrowing and inspiring journey, detailing her experience of being deceived by one of Australia's most notorious conmen who defrauded her of her life savings. Tune in to hear Tracy's story, a testament to her resilience, self-compassion, and incredible inner strength. So welcome to Uncomfortable Growth Uncut. I'm here with the incredible Tracy Hall. So Tracy and I met a number of years ago now through various intersections in marketing. Tracy is a previous CMO, most recently of Afterpay, but more importantly, she has an incredible story. She's a recent author, which captures her story, and she's also a keynote speaker and a fantastic person to help in the corporate world. I'm just delighted that Tracy is here so that we can hear her uncomfortable growth story firsthand. So welcome, Tracy.
Hey, Rowena, how are you?
Yeah, really good, really good. And it's so nice that we get to catch up on a podcast.
Yeah, I know it's been so long, but so much has happened.
Exactly. So I'm going to jump straight in and ask you to share your uncomfortable growth story.
Wow. Okay. So in 2016, I had decided that I wanted to get back into the dating scene. I'd separated from my husband about a year earlier, and I'd spent that year sort of, we were working through the divorce, and I had a 6-year-old. I think she was 5.5 at the time. And I decided that it was time for me to go and meet someone and find a companion and someone I could spend my time with, who had similar values and morals to me. And so, where do you go in your early 40s when you're looking for that? Onto the dating apps. And yeah, it was pretty slim pickings back in 2016. I believe it is still slim pickings now, but yeah, it was kind of an interesting experience for me because obviously, before I got married and met my husband, dating apps didn't exist. So
Mm.
it was all very much a new experience and gave me a lot of laughs and content to share with my friends over wine on the weekends, but mostly quite demoralizing in a lot of ways and very distracting, actually, until I swiped right on a man by the name of Max Tavita. And he was a Bondi surfer. He was a chief investment officer for a family office. He had National Geographic blue eyes and a megawatt smile. And I thought he looked pretty normal. His photos were of him running and surfing and doing the things that he loved. And that was a nice change from the men who were posing with sedated tigers in Thailand. So,
Can't even
yeah,
imagine. Yeah, I can't even imagine going back into the dating scene, let alone in a very different technology-driven context.
yeah, it
Like,
was, yeah, it was a really interesting thing to navigate. But of course, I was at this point almost solo parenting, so I wasn't
mm,
going out. It was really even difficult sometimes to go to friends' places to, have dinner or whatever it might
mhm.
be. So I knew that some awesome guy wasn't going to fall out of my ceiling while I was watching maths on a Monday night. So I persisted,
Yes.
and yeah, there were times where it was fun and it was funny, and I met a few people, and it was, it was good fun, and it was good to get
Mhm.
confidence back and things like that.
Mhm.
Um, but I did meet this man called Max Tavita, and I swiped right on him, and we started a relationship, and I guess you could describe it as a pretty slow burn.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't have a lot of time. I was single parenting, and it was really only every second weekend. I was working full time at eBay at that stage in a big job with a really big
Mm.
team. And so my time was pretty limited, and we built our relationship slowly, and it felt like we built it over shared values and morals, and shared interests, which were pretty much
Mm.
exercising, running, surfing, paddleboarding, picnics, a really
Mm-hmm.
basic, very wholesome early 40s style of relationship.
Well, and also
Um,
because you are looking, I think, for something different when you're a parent as well.
yeah,
It's not the dating maybe of our youths where it was partying and having fun and weekends away and
yeah, it wasn't that at all. And I'd done all that, And
yeah.
I think, to be clear, like I wasn't looking for someone to sweep me off my feet and propose to me. And I wasn't looking for another husband. I was in
Mhm.
my early 40s. So the prospect of having more children was pretty much off the cards. I wasn't
Mm.
looking for that. I just wanted someone to spend some time with who I
Mm.
could trust, who had my back, who there was a level of mutual respect.
Yeah,
This
you're looking
wholesome,
for a great human.
yeah, just a good solid human being to spend some time with, and to build a companionship and a future with. Really was what I was looking
Mm.
for, and I thought that's what I had found. And we built this relationship over the course of 16 months, and we took holidays together. We spoke multiple times a day. There was so much communication. So whilst we didn't see each other every day, we certainly spoke every day, and it was built slowly over time because obviously of my other responsibilities. And yeah, like I said, he met my family. We went on family holidays together, and this sort of progressed over the course of 16 months. And it wasn't until mid-July 2017, I woke up one morning and a friend had sent me a link to a Crime Stoppers video. And it was a video of a man being arrested outside of his Bondi Beach apartment for swindling 15 victims out of $7.6 million. And that man was my boyfriend, Max Tavita.
Wow.
Except it wasn't my boyfriend, Max Tavita. It was a man called Hamish McLaren, and he happens to be one of Australia's most prolific conmen. And that is when my world came crashing down around me. And yeah, it started from there, really.
I can only imagine the disbelief, particularly as it had been a relationship that was built over time and you'd,
Mm,
done all these wholesome things to use your words. It wasn't like this quick, intense relationship where you don't maybe know each other that well. Like it was
no.
built around spending quality time and, when you can, and lots of communication. I mean, what did you actually believe the video when you first saw it?
I think my first thought, my first reaction was shock and disbelief, because how could this man who I loved and who loved me and who I trusted and who I'd spent the better part of 18 months of my life with, he's being arrested outside of his apartment, like, and it's got headlines like, Bondi businessman 47 superannuation fraud. And I'm thinking, but Max is 42. He told me he's 42. Like there was all of this really strange disbelief going on. And, of course, started to deal with the police and the investigators pretty quickly.
Mm.
And once I knew his real name, I could go deep into the internet and research him. And it didn't take very long to find out that he'd been up to this level of crime and fraud for many, many, many years. Like I'm talking 20, 25 years. And
Mm.
there's a lot written on the internet about him when you know his real name. But of course, I had a fake name, I had a false identity, and I had pretty much a fictitious 18 months of my life that I had to put back together.
Mm.
And then in between all of that, obviously I was in disbelief and shock, but realized pretty quickly what I was dealing with. I remembered that I had given him my life savings,
Mm.
and I lost $317,000 to him.
Oh my gosh. And how, like, so prior to seeing him arrested, and you'd given him your life savings, had that just come up as a normal conversation, or like how did that transpire when you felt you knew and trusted him? He
Yeah.
was, your partner.
Well, I mean, the short answer is, it was nearly 18 months of coercive control and grooming was what
Mm,
it was. The long answer is that he presented himself as a chief investment officer for a family office. And what ensued was hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of conversations, text messages, email reports, fake documentation, Bloomberg screens in his apartment,
mm,
um, fake offices, photos that he would send from his office, conversations that I overheard him having with people who didn't exist in the way that he said they were. So, back office people doing trades and investment strategies
mm,
for the family office clients. And, this went on for 16 months. This was death by a thousand conversations, to a point where I'd overheard these things and we had talked about these things so much, and I'd seen so much documentation and
mm,
evidence that he was who he said he was,
mm,
that when it came time to him asking me about my superannuation and which fund I was with and how much I was paying in fees, and that he could do better for me and that he
mm.
was the perfect person to invest for me, I trusted him. I thought he had my back. He told me he wanted me to be financially independent. He could help me. There was no question in my mind that he was the perfect person to do it for me.
Yeah.
And this is what coercive control looks like, right?
Mm.
It is not meeting Hamish on a dating app and 2 weeks later him knocking on my door and saying, "Hey, Trace, give me all your super and your
Yeah.
investments and your savings, and I'm going to go invest it for you." Because, of course, I never would have done that.
Mm,
But when you're groomed in this way and you're
mm,
led to believe that somebody is who they say they are, and you trust, because why
mm.
would I not believe that everything matched, everything lined
Mhm.
up?
Yeah,
Um,
everything you saw signaled that this was real life,
of
that it was not a
course.
fraud. It was just what he does. It's his expertise. It's
Yeah. In the same way, Rowena, that if I am talking to someone and they've got a business problem and I can see a marketing solution for it, I will talk to them about that and
mm,
give them advice and say, why don't you do this? Or what about that? Or I could help you, or, whatever it might be. Because after 25 years of doing something, you get very, very good at it, right?
mhm,
And I believed him. I trusted him. I never in a million years thought that
mhm,
at the same time he was, pretending to have my back, that he was also plotting to, deceive and defraud me out of my life savings for his own financial gain. And he leveraged that trust and he leveraged that emotion to a point where I thought he was the perfect person to
mm.
do it. And of course, looking back, and of course, with hindsight,
Yeah, yeah,
there's so many red flags, and I pull them out in the narrative of the book as I'm going through the chronological order of what happened. But of
mm,
course, at the time, I didn't see those. I had my rose-colored glasses on. I loved him,
yeah,
So, but he manipulated that, and yeah, this is what happens in these situations with a lot of scams and frauds. It doesn't just happen with the click of a button.
yeah.
These people build relationships, they build
Yeah.
trust, and that's how they weasel their way into your life, into your heart, into your head to get what they want.
Mm, mm. I mean, it like I can hear your hear your story and know that yeah, I would have trusted. I would have, if I'd been in a situation where I was looking for someone to date and gone through all the things that you've gone through, um, yeah, I would have, because I am quite an open, trusting
Mm,
person. I sometimes watch TV shows or Law and Order, and I'm like, I make a terrible cop. Like, I'm far too trusting. I want to believe them when they say they had nothing to do with it.
Yeah.
Reality,
And
when we've
most people are.
yeah, and when we've
Mm,
led sheltered lives where we've never been overtly exposed
mm,
to this sort of thing, like
yeah.
yes, the obvious scams, like when you get, the text message with the wrong spell.
Yeah.
I'm like, we all know that. We all know
Yeah.
that that's, a scam. But the level of expertise behind this scam
Mm.
and
And the time,
the
he
time, yes.
pretended to love me for 18 months. Like, that's a long time to pretend to love someone. And I
Mm,
think, in the past, the media haven't done a great job at presenting these stories with care, to be honest, because they are very sensationalized. These 4-minute stories that you see in a current affair or shows like that. And it's, the image that we have of someone being scammed like I have is a
mm,
lonely middle-aged woman sitting in a lounge room looking for love, and all of a sudden her life savings goes to her African prince. Oh my God, how did that happen? And
mm,
you watch these stories and you think, that would never happen to me. I'd never be that stupid.
mm,
And it's the way that they're expressed. And I understand they only have 4 minutes for a story, and you've got to condense it down and all of that
mm.
stuff. But they do nothing to explain the depth and the complexity of how layered these relationships are, and how
Well, it's
deep
the expertise. It's
yeah.
the expertise that he'd obviously built up. And
Mm,
he had a formula, and that's
yeah.
because he was emulating the type of relationship that normal people long for.
Yeah.
That's the
And
relationship we want.
yeah, and he was an incredible shapeshifter. So
Mm,
he was very, very good at mirroring, and that's one skill that people like this have, where he just presented back to me everything I said I wanted in a relationship and out of my life, and he
mm,
basically became that. And for someone else who wasn't in a intimate relationship with him, he found their point,
mm,
and he became that person for them. A
mm,
businessman, a barrister, whatever it was he needed to be. And
mm.
so he was an incredible listener. And all he had to do was listen to what people wanted and needed and have those conversations. So on some level, very, very, I write about in my book, it's not that he had no empathy. He actually weaponized empathy,
Yes, yes.
and,
He
and then just became that person.
Yeah. Wow. And so, did you get the chance to face him?
I spoke to him a few times. He called me from jail a few times in that first 6 months after he was arrested. And I was just like so confused at the time, just peppering him with questions like, what's your real name? What's your identity? Your parents are like, where do you live? Da, da, da.
Mm,
And of course I really got no answers, or at least the answers I got, I can't trust that they're the truth, because,
mm,
nothing that he says is honest. And then there were some letters that I received from him. I did see him throughout the court process, but he wouldn't look at me. So
mm,
I haven't had a conversation with him since those last phone calls, which sort of happened months after he was arrested. So yeah, that's no, I haven't had a direct conversation with him. I've thought about it.
mm.
He was very, very desperate for me to go and see him when he was arrested and when he was in jail, and it was kind of like this dangling a $317,000 carrot in front of my face. This, I don't know, this lure of getting my money back. And I just decided at the time that, I couldn't trust anything that came out of his mouth. There was no way that that money was coming back. The best thing for me to do was to work with the authorities
Mm.
and to make a statement and become one of the victims. And that's where the communication ended.
Wow. And so, how do you pick yourself up from that such extreme misuse of you as a person?
Mm,
I mean, it's just, we've pretty much all had relationships that have ended because the relationship wasn't working.
mm,
But this is completely different. Um, you know,
yeah.
this is him, as you say, like weaponizing himself as a human
Mm,
to deceive and fraud, knowing that you love him. I mean,
mm,
so the
yeah.
complexity of that. Yeah. How did you move through that?
I think I think one of the hardest things was in that first kind of 24 hours of seeing that video was coming to terms with the fact that it had taken me nearly 18 months to fall in love with him and build this relationship and this, experience with another human. And
Mm,
I essentially had to fall out of love with him within hours.
mm,
And the person that I was in love with didn't actually exist.
mm,
He was a fictitious character
mm,
that was created so that I would fall in love with him.
mm,
And so getting my head around that was really hard because it was so confusing for my brain. I was just,
mm,
obviously I'm dealing with the thought that I've lost my life savings. I am
mm,
trying to work with the police. I've got a non-compliant superannuation fund. I may or may not have a fraudulent tax return that he helped me with. I'm having to make a 30-page statement to the police detailing conversations, dates, details, events from the last 18 months of my life. I am working full time because I can't lose my job.
mm,
I am single parenting a 6.5-year-old that I made a decision very early on that there would be no tears at the dinner table and I would shield her from this. So
mm,
all of this was done in private in the
mm,
very wee hours of the morning. And, you know, at the same time, I couldn't get answers. And I think
mm,
one thing that I've realized is our brains don't like unfinished stories.
mm,
So what happens is we either make up the information so that we can put it to the side, or
mm,
we live in this state of ambiguity
mm,
and your brain cannot rest. You can't move on. And I could not rest. I could not eat. I could not sleep. I could not think. I was probably the worst employee ever during that time. And I've always prided myself on my work ethic and,
mm,
showing up and doing a good job. But I was just so busy trying to deal with so much. And, I felt, financially ruined 100%. I'm like, oh my Lord, like I'm
mm,
41, 42. I have nothing. I have my income. I literally have nothing else. So financially, I'm back on the starting line.
mm,
Emotionally, and this is a horrible term, but it aptly describes how I felt, was that I felt emotionally raped.
mm,
I felt so violated
mm,
on so many levels, so deceived.
mm,
And I had to put the pieces of the story together, but no one would talk to me. So the police wouldn't talk to me apart from my dealing with them on the my statement,
yeah,
because it was a legal issue, of course.
yeah,
His family wouldn't talk to me because maybe they were worried they would be implicated or their Team Hamish, or for whatever reason.
mm,
Friends wouldn't talk to me. There was very little information I was getting apart from what I could find on the internet.
mm,
And so that was very difficult for me because I couldn't put this story to bed. I couldn't, I lost 6 kilos in 3 weeks. And I'm a
you're a
small person.
slim person to start.
Yeah, I'm a midget. And it's, you know, that I just could not rest. I could not
And
eat,
yeah,
I couldn't let it go.
yeah, because I mean, I cannot fully imagine what you've gone through because I don't think anyone could really imagine it unless they're in it
Mm,
themselves.
mm,
But I can imagine too how stressful it would be to not be able to trust your instincts because like your instincts told you he was a good person, that he loved you, that he cared for
mm,
you back, that he was your partner.
yeah.
And then suddenly, like I think your brain can sometimes go, okay, well, I've got all this data now refuting who he was,
Mm,
and that's logical. But your emotions don't work in the same way, and they're so instinctual and we're so reliant on them. I mean, that's like questioning yourself.
100%. And I get asked that question a lot, like how do you trust after something like that's happened? How do you go out in the world and trust again? How do you operate in the world after this has happened? And the reality is, it wasn't other people I couldn't trust, it was myself.
Mm.
Because I felt like I had a great intuition. I felt like I could read people. I've traveled the world. I have an incredible education, a great family, amazing friends. And
Mm.
yet I'd missed it. Like there was nothing in my intuition that told me that this man was out to get me, because he's such a professional, right? So in those, weeks and months, and not even kidding, like years afterwards,
Mm.
the the level of self-loathing, and there is not one thing anyone can say to me about this experience that I haven't already said to myself, in the
Mm.
worst possible, most disgusting, mean way, because I've said it all to myself, because I just couldn't believe it happened to me. I couldn't believe I'd let it happen.
Mm.
And so the biggest piece of work for me was to rebuild myself and
Mm.
trust in myself to make good decisions, to
Mm.
let good people into my life, to believe what people are saying to me, to
Mm.
look at the world with wonder again, and with optimism and positivity, because I mean, I'm a super positive. I mean, you know me, like I have this positivity bias that,
Mhm.
I think everything's great. And that was really shaky for a long time. And a lot of it had to do, and I've sort of really, I'm talking like 6 years down the track, 7 years down the track, only just really come to terms with the fact that a lot of that was driven by shame.
Mm.
Because for a good year, I didn't talk about this to anybody. My
Yeah.
closest friends knew.
Yeah.
I didn't, there were no tears at the dinner table. I was going to get on with work. I couldn't lose my job. So I doubled down on that. So it
Yeah.
was my only financial lifeline at the
Yeah.
time. And thank the Lord, I've always had, an amazing career, an amazing job. And it's so important to hold on to these things through all the seasons of our lives.
Mm.
So I'm so grateful for that. But, you know, it was so much shame,
Mm.
because, and what I've realized about shame is it's an incredibly lonely feeling,
Mm.
very, very lonely emotion, because you're quite disconnected. You want to disconnect from the event or the feeling because it's so gross.
Yeah.
And you want to tuck it away somewhere in a deep, dark hole and pretend it never happened.
Yeah. And definitely not let anyone get a hint that it's there, because it's something that you want to hide about yourself.
Yeah, it makes me less of a person to admit that this has happened to me, and there's judgment from myself, and what have you. So it's this dark, dingy petri dish that just keeps growing and festering
Mm.
until you can actually face it head on, shine some light on it, and really, do the work and the self-reflection and the deep thinking that goes with really admitting to yourself, and working through that pain and the shame.
Yeah.
Because the disconnection, I felt very disconnected from the world because I wanted to hide away. But the reality is, I actually felt disconnected from myself.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that was the hardest thing, because I'm like, man, if I can't even come to terms with this myself, then how do I come to terms with the world and everything I've got to deal with moving forward?
Yeah.
And that has been the hardest work for me. And to be honest, the, you know, the biggest thing, and there's nothing remarkable about this statement, but just showing an incredible amount of self-compassion.
Mm.
Talking nicely to myself rather than talking harshly, really understanding this situation for what it is, what it was, how it happened. And there was a lot of vulnerability there in my life at the time I met him. There's a lot of vulnerability since, but really the healing began when I started to learn about who this man was, which only came about when the podcast started to get underway.
Yeah. Well, and the thing that's really funny, funny as in confusing, but it still is that way, is about shame, sorry, is that you feel that you've done the wrong thing. Like you're the one who has been, stupid for, how could you believe this guy? Or how did you not see it? Or, you idiot, why would you sign over your life savings? And shame is blame deep inside. But also we know that it wasn't your fault. You're just a good person, and he was a masterful criminal.
Yeah.
I mean, he'd probably get an Academy Award acting, like he's a great actor.
Yeah. And I did have that conversation with my therapist at one time. I went to her after quite a while and I said, I really, I had my list of things I wanted to talk to her about. And I was like, I really need to understand what it is about me that allowed someone like him to come into my life, and what can I do to change myself? Typically a female response, I think it's like, what did I do wrong? And how can I make it better? And what's my part to play in this? And how can I grow as a human? And all of this crap. And she just laughed at me and she said, Trace, like, you're making out like this is your personality defect. Like, there's something wrong inside of you that made this happen. And she goes, you do know that he is a master manipulator, criminal of 30 years. Like, this is his personality defect, not the fact that you missed something. And I was like, and she's like, you're victim blaming yourself. And that really hit home for me because, I've always been, like, your thing is uncomfortable growth, like have a growth mindset. How can I do things differently and be a better person and learn? And I think all those things are important. Like, I've had to really reflect deeply on the things that happened and really be honest with myself. And throughout the book it's a very honest kind of portrayal of what was happening and my deep vulnerabilities during that time. But at the end of the day, I couldn't have critically thought my way out of this situation. There's no way I could have guessed that this was happening to me. Yes, there were red flags, and even that language sometimes bothers me because it makes it seem like if they were the big waving red flags, like, you'd see them. They're actually invisible flags. They're only red flags afterwards.
Yeah.
Or if someone on the sideline is seeing them.
Yeah.
So it's like this, it just perpetuates this feeling that I should have known better. I should have seen it. I should have seen that big red flag.
Yeah. And
You
it's,
know?
like I know you used the like reference before around rape, but it is emotionally, we know that often rape victims blame themselves.
Yeah.
For getting into a situation, but it wasn't their fault. And I can only imagine how much blame is the automatic response until you do the work to recognize that the emotional reaction, it's not us. Like, it's actually not your fault. It's exactly what your therapist said. And one of the things I talk a lot about in uncomfortable growth, or even in EQ training that I do, is we all have a small self and a best self. And we move between them because they coexist. Not one side, but our small self has a stronger wiring. And that's the fear wiring. And when you have something that happens to you, which is intense, extreme, and triggers that small self, it's such a lot of work, but so important to figure out how you can let that go. I just want to recognize, Tracy, your courage. And I know it's taken, as you've said, years, but your courage in not only doing what you needed to do to work through it, but your choice to now be shining a light on the reality of this and that it can happen to anyone.
Yeah, and it does. I
And it
get
does.
so many messages every day, and this has happened since the podcast came out. So for the last 5 years, people, strangers and friends, have come to me telling me their stories. And, where we started, where you think this would never happen to me, it's incredible the amount of people that have come to me and said, this happened to my parents, this happened to me, this happened to my best friend. And there are stories that I've heard from friends that I've been mates with for the better part of 20 years. And they told me their stories, and I'm like, how is it we've never had this conversation before? Like, how is it that only now that I've told my story that there is a level of comfort? And I took a lot away from that when I did the podcast, because there was a moment when I wasn't sure I was going to do the podcast. I wasn't sure I was going to go and talk to Greg Bearup, the journalist from The Australian, because of shame, because of embarrassment. And I understand why people don't come forward. 30% of scams and fraud are not reported. And there's a whole bunch of reasons for that. There's shame, there's reputational risk, there's career damage, there's family, there's trauma, and I don't judge anybody for not coming forward. It's one thing to have your name on a statement that's read out in court, and there's another thing to talk about it publicly. But I totally understand why that doesn't happen. But in telling my story, it has brought this conversation out into a broader public domain. The media have been incredible in picking up this story. It is on the back of, what we know, about domestic abuse, including financial coercive control, which is very, very much a part of this story as well. And I think it's really important that we keep this story top of mind, because the more we talk about it, and the more I'm happy to be the person that goes, hey, this happened to me. Like, I worked through all of that stuff to be able to stand here and say, this happens more than we think it does. And so anyone who's experienced that, and it doesn't have to be losing your life savings to a conman. We all have things that have happened to us in our lives that we don't want to connect with or work on or, talk about. If that allows somebody to feel slightly seen, or give them a little bit more confidence, or a little bit of a inspiration to go and talk to someone about it, whether it be a friend, a parent, or a therapist, a professional, then I feel like I've done my job. I feel like this hasn't been in vain.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
No, and I think it's so important and so valuable. We all have that small self, but we all hide it because we feel that the world,
Won't
other
love
people
us.
don't really have one, not as
Yeah.
bad as ours, right? Like ours must be worse. And so we hide it. And yet it's really so difficult to be able to move through, like release that small self to move into your best self again. And that's how I also talk about uncomfortable growth. It's when we can't stop these awful things from happening. Yours is horrendous, to be conned that way. But your courage and like positivity in dealing with it and then sharing the story means that, others will learn, others will come out, others will heal. I just think that's the most beautiful way to turn something that's really dark and hard into something that is a journey of learning, but also the power of resilience and insight. And
Oh, I appreciate that. And I think too, there's I've had a lot of chats recently about, the title of my book is The Last Victim. And there's been a lot of discussion around the word victim. And, do you see yourself as a victim? And are you a victim? And what do you think about the word victim? And I'm like, I do not have a problem with the word victim, clearly, because this is the language they use in the system. I am a victim. I'm on a victims registry. I was a victim in the case against Hamish, where he was prosecuted. And, I was a victim of crime. There is no getting around that. And there's this narrative that says, we can't be victims, we've got to be survivors. And it's like, well, yes, but that takes time and it has to be authentic. You can't just say it and suddenly it happens. I am a victim. What I like to say about the word victim is that I refuse to have a victim mindset. And that's where I make the differentiation, because if I was to stay in that space of complete shock, disbelief, shame, blame, all of those emotions that I felt very early on, depression, anxiety, I would be remaining in a victim mindset. And it's not easy, but with the right support, it's definitely, in the right frame of mind, it's, and I'm so grateful I have a strong mental constitution. And that's not to say I was on medication after this to help me get through those really tough first 6 to 12 months. But I woke up one morning, Rowena, and I thought, if I stay there, then he wins. And I didn't believe at that moment in time that he deserved to win. I believe that I deserve to win because I've done nothing wrong. And yes, it's something that happened to me, but it's not who I am. And I have the strength and the power to make it whatever I want it to be. And at that time, I didn't know I was going to be speaking publicly about it. I didn't know I was going to be having all these conversations. I didn't know I was going to be advocating for other victims. But it's what it's turned into, and I'm very proud of that. But I made a decision pretty early on that I didn't want a victim mindset, and that's where I make the differentiation.
I love that nuance, and I think you're absolutely right, because if we don't acknowledge the truth of what happened, which is you were a victim, then we don't really deal with it, and then kind of get to a point where we can see the choice to choose a different mindset. So
Yeah.
I love that nuance, and I think it's really important. So, wow. Well, I have some quick fire questions
Yes.
at the end, which, I think will be very insightful based on conversation. Okay. The first one is, what are 3 things you've learned about yourself in recent years?
Oh, I did. I have thought about these because these are the ones that always trip me up. One thing that I've realized is that the human spirit has an incredible capacity to endure. If you had have said to me in my early 20s that all of these things are going to happen to you in your life, and I won't give any spoilers, but I do go into detail about the other things that, what happened with Hamish wasn't the worst thing that's ever happened to me, believe it or not. It was pretty bad. It was pretty bad. It's up there, but not the worst. A lot has happened. And if you had have said to me in my early 20s, these are all the things that are going to happen to you, Trace, and you know what? You're going to be okay. You're actually going to be okay. I would have looked at that on paper and gone, I'm done. I'm out. No thanks. Don't want that. Don't want that life. And yet here I am. And, it's not always been easy. It's not always been fun. But I think, and you hear stories, and people's ability, the human spirit's ability to endure is just incredible. It blows my mind every day. And we press on. Life goes on, So that's one thing. Self-compassion, we've spoken about that. I am so much more self-compassionate. I'm compassionate. I have more empathy and compassion generally for other people's situation. But the most important thing is to be self-compassionate. And the third one is a lot around acceptance. So a lot of my kind of challenges come from resisting. Oh, I can't believe this happened, and I don't want this to happen, and I don't want to have that. And what resists persists, right? And
Mm.
accepting what is presented with grace and compassion and care and empathy, it's just helped me so enormously. That's not to say I like it all.
Yeah.
It's just, it is what it
Not
is.
to say
And
it's easy in
no, and
any way.
we just deal with it because we
Yeah.
can.
Yeah. It's that honesty, isn't it?
Mm,
The ability to also be honest with yourself and with that compassion to say, it's not your fault, but let's acknowledge it.
mm.
Let's be real. Second one, what is important to you at the moment in your life?
Whew, what is important to me? My health.
Mm.
My health is my number one value, because I know that without health, we have nothing.
Mhm.
My dad passed away very young. My mum got breast cancer. Like, I know what it is not to be well.
Mm.
And so for me, health is my number one thing. So constantly on top of that, which allows me to be everything to everyone else that I need to be, as well as to myself. Having a strong mindset, so really working on where my head's at is
Mm.
really important to me. I'm working a lot at the moment on language, the language I tell myself silently, but the language I say out loud, and how
Mm.
important language is in how it
Mm.
creates your energy and your vibration and what you're putting out into the world. So I'm working a lot on that at the moment, and, and just staying the course. Like, I've been presented with this opportunity through quite difficult circumstances, in a sense, but to
Mm.
turn it into something positive, and I'm determined to do that. So for me, it's important that I stay the course and continue to focus on this and continue to advocate and continue to spread the message and educate people.
Beautiful. I love it. And my last question, which has three parts, of course it does.
Good
What
things
is,
come in threes.
that's right, that's right. What is a current fear, a
Yep.
current inspiration, and a current challenge for you at the moment?
Yes. Current fear. I think because of all the things that have happened to me, I am often fearful that the things that I love the most will be taken away from me.
Mm.
So sometimes I feel really challenged to feel deep love and deep joy, because what if they go tomorrow?
Mm.
That's really hard for me. So constantly just trying to be in the moment and not think about those things. But of course, all my experiences in life, I've have that inside me. So accepting that as well, accepting that that's how I feel from time to time, but really trying to be in the moment and love deeply and feel joy
Mm.
hugely, um, is one thing I'm working on. Inspiring. I'm one of those people, Rowan. I'm really easily inspired and really easily
Mm.
pleased. Like, the smallest things inspire me. Like, I have women in my soccer team who are 10 years
Mm.
older than me, so they're 59, and they are still playing Division 1 women's
Mhm.
soccer, and they run around like crazy every Sunday, and they're doing so well. And I'm inspired by that, because I wake up on a Monday morning feeling very sore and sorry for myself. And I think if I can do that in another 10 years like they are, I will be happy. I'm
Yeah.
inspired by my girlfriends who are going through separations and protecting their children. I am inspired by a mate of mine who just ran the Tokyo Marathon.
Mm.
Another friend of mine's been diagnosed with cancer, and she's just carrying on with life and being her awesome, positive self. Like, I'm inspired by so many things every day, like, which is
Mm.
great, because it gives me great energy and compassion as well. And the final one was the challenge. What's
Challenge.
challenging me? Well, this is the first time in my life that I am not working for a big corporate. I am on my own, building a business,
Mhm.
telling my story every day, trying to, really help other people, but also, create a business, and create a life, and rebuild what I've lost financially, which is very important to me, high on my value set as well. So yeah, doing everything as a a single solopreneur, I guess. All the different hats that we wear, and but I've never been more motivated. I'm so determined to use this experience in a positive way, and of course that needs to be commercial as well. So yeah, that's it's a challenge, but it's a challenge I'm actually really loving.
Yeah. Oh, that's great. Well, Tracy, I just want to say thank you so much for coming on the Uncomfortable Growth Uncut podcast and just sharing with so much grace your story, which I know will help so many other people, whether it's something that's happened to them already or whether it's something that could happen in the future. So thank you so much.
Oh, thank you for having me. It's been so nice to chat.
If you are inspired but thinking, I can't do that, then you are so wrong. Anyone can learn the art of uncomfortable growth with the help of my flagship program, Uncomfortable Growth, Own Your Reinvention. In this, you will learn to navigate your own internal contradictions to finally unlock the courage and commitment to live a deeply meaningful life by design and on your terms. Uncomfortable growth is about the struggle and joy in discovering who you are, what you truly want, and how to make it happen. If this is something you are ready for, then find out more at www.rowenamillward.com. What have you got to lose, or more importantly, gain?